This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply located in Dayton, Ohio, exclusive distributor of Jen Allen templates and Put a Lid on It t-shirts. We are a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network. Find all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs, including the largest stock of GR pottery forms at cornellstudiosupply.com. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters, by potters.
The 2024 Michiana Pottery Tour will take place across 10 locations in northern Indiana and southwest Michigan on Saturday, September 28th and Sunday, September 29th. The Michiana Pottery Tour includes more than 50 artists at multiple locations around the region. This two-day tour is a program of the Northern Indiana Clay Alliance, with an interest in promoting the Michiana region as a hub for contemporary ceramics. Learn more at michianapotterytour.com.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 523 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Christy Culp. Her terracotta pots are decorated with blueberries, carrots, and other motifs that come from her western Pennsylvania farm. In our interview, we talk about her decades-long career as a high school ceramic teacher, building a dream studio out of a late 1800s barn that was on the farm, and how her yoga practice supports her ceramic practice. In this interview, we also talk about Christy's work in my new book, The Complete Guide to Low-Fire Glazes for Potters and Sculptors. The book was officially released this week and is now available wherever fine books are sold. This is going to be one of the many interviews with artists that are in the book that will be sprinkled over the next couple months. There's over 95 artists featured in the book, and it is a broad survey of what people are doing with low-fire glaze. Again, the name is The Complete Guide to Low-Fire Glazes for Potters and Sculptors. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So I wanted to start talking about how the things that you actually grow on the farm that you live on, like blackberries and blueberries, how that actually influences the work. Because I've noticed that a lot of the pots themselves look like collections of what you're growing. So can you talk a little about that influence back and forth?
Yeah, I noticed when I was in college that I was very influenced by nature and what was around me. I grew up in on top of a river valley. So there were all these rolling hills, and my work graduated into making these giant bowls that were very, I would distort them. So they had these large rolling kinds of edges to them, and I would make them fit with other ones. And I didn't understand it at the time, and I was just aware of it, that it was influencing me. And as I grew older and moved away, I found that I was very influenced by the farms that I lived on, because I always lived on a farm. So I remember walking up to an apple tree that it was out in a pasture, and I didn't grow up with fruit farms. I grew up on a farm that was a dairy farm. So there was corn and there was hay. But seeing these clusters of apples on this tree, I don't know what it was, but it just hit me somewhere. And I find that happens over and over and over again. So now here, when we started planting the berries, that really became, when your face is so immersed in these luscious clusters of berries. They are like jewels, like Henry VIII had those rings of the garnets. It really is like that. And I find that I have to put them on there. And it grew into the first year we grew radishes and carrots in the garden, and I'm pulling them out like a 3-year-old and just squealing with glee, like, oh my God, they came out fully formed. Mm-hmm. And just those bright spots of color, they work their way in and they end up on pots, and it's almost an impulse to do it. Whatever is in front of me is what's going to end up on a pot, whether it's intentional or not. I'll try it, and then it just grows and grows and grows. So the blackberries that we have now, they make me so happy. It's just part of who I am. As soon as they start coming on, I'm out there checking, are they ready? Are they ready? Are they ready? But again, it's that idea of being immersed. Like, I want people, when they look at my work, to feel like they are there and that fruit is right in front of them and they can reach in and pick them. Because that's what I'm experiencing. Like, those clusters of berries are in front of me, and the bees are sometimes around. Usually when the berries are there, the bees aren't there because the blossoms are gone. But it's the same thing with the oranges. And I don't have an orange grove in Pennsylvania, but I wanted people to feel like they were looking up into the trees. And that's why the blue was there, to represent the sky that you would be seeing through it.
Yeah, and that color contrast works so well, that like kind of baby blue beside the really bright orange. There's like a ton of pop there.
It does pop. And when they printed that page in Ceramics Monthly, it just like screamed at me. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, when you see it in another way, in a book, how other people might see your work. Like, okay, that is what I was going for. A bright sunny day.
So one of the things you do also, like perspective wise, is you do radishes, carrots, things that are root vegetables that you pull out of the ground. And the radishes, you've done this thing on a couple plates where you look like you could reach down and grab one. Like, it's the perspective of standing right above them, looking down into the ground. And it's such a different way to think about use on a pot, because then whatever, like let's say we have salad in a bowl that has that decoration. As you eat the salad down, the roots or the radishes are kind of coming up towards you visually. And that's such like a beautiful play of space on a pot. So how do you think about scale? Like, once you pick a motif, how do you think about scale on the work?
I don't know if I've ever thought about it, but thank you for noticing which direction the radishes are going. Because I do think about that. I think about, how are they layering as they work their way around the pot, because I don't want it to become stagnant. I really want it to be a forward, backward, so that it really looks like those radishes are on the plate, and not in any kind of realistic way, but enough that you understand one is in front of the other, or you're looking from the bottom, or you're looking from the top. I would say that I like to have the scale close to what they are, though I found that the turnips get to be really big. They take up a lot of space. I just want them to feel like they're moving around, that they're very active. I don't want it to just be a row. I really want them to show that lushness. Again, the overlap, the back and forth of them. Like, you picked them and you threw them into the bowl, and there they are all piled up on each other.
Can you talk a little bit about your process? Like, when, let's say you've got a triangle, because I love the big triangle platters and bowls that you've made. Triangle can be tricky though, because it always looks like itself. Like, you can't disguise a triangle. So can you kind of talk us through the process of a pot like that when you're designing it? Like, what are the steps that you take?
So those triangle shapes, there's always an anchor motif, and it might be 1 orange or it might be 3 oranges. I like to work in those odd numbers. And wherever I place them, there's always 2 planes. And for example, on that triangle plate, there's the wall plane, and then there's the bottom of the plate. And the motif has to cross, because if it doesn't, it's not active. I want the wall to be separate from the plate. And usually I define it between white with honeycomb and then the blue sky. Somehow there's a version of that, but the leaves always have to cross, because I want that crossover to happen, because it's more interesting and it's dynamic. So like I tell my students this, you can control people. You can make them look where you want them to look. So if I have these beautiful, big, bright oranges, you're paying attention to those. But the leaf that is the sharp pointer will make your eye go someplace else. So usually there's a leaf that's pointing in, and then the next group will be pointing back the other way. So that's going to draw you in. So I always want this almost undulating movement around there. And the bees usually just are the little extras that kind of lead you in little circles around them. And it's also like I do the 3 sizes. So the oranges are large, the leaves are medium, and the bees are small, because I want to have that very balanced variety of those images. Because if the bees are big, it becomes a very stagnant pot. And if the leaves are too big, it also halts it. And I found that that happens when I'm not paying attention or I'm tired.
That's a good observation. Like, what are our instincts as we get tired or bored? You know, like sometimes
Yes.
I think of like if you're doing too much of one form, I kind of start mailing it in. You know what I mean? Have you experienced that?
I have. I find that when I'm tired or bored with a particular pattern, that it does not look good and I'm not paying attention. And it's usually when I start changing into something else. I think it's good that it happens, because it's exhausting to continually do the same pattern. You know, it is. I think it's like that with anything. You need to keep it fresh. So, how can we change this up, or just set it aside for a while and come back to it?
Do you ever wish you were more engaged or more excited by simpler objects?
Oh my God, I try so hard. And I'm trying it again. I found this wooden bowl at a store and I bought it, and I just started working with trying to make a mold from it. And my goal is to not decorate it. I just want to use slip, sort of in a way like Courtney Martin, like her pieces, where it's just a very simple design. Like I have that in my mind, and I know that I will go back and forth to it, but I feel like I need to investigate it. But I keep more is more is more is more.
Me too. Well, when you figure out, can you teach me how to be more engaged with simpler things?
Absolutely. We will do that workshop.
Because it is this desire, I think, for activity. Like as you're describing the way the motif fits the pot, you're constantly wanting the person's eye to move. And I'm the same way. Like I can't get that out of my design aesthetic. Like occasionally I'll look at someone. Do you know Tom Yashak's work, or Yazchak?
Yes, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And he'll just have like small rectangular or triangular, small geometry. And then the rest is just like a lightly soda fired pot. And I'm like, how do you isolate it to such a specific voice? Because I think about it as voice, like he's making a statement and sticking to the statement. And my instinct is to keep saying the statement.
Yeah, I think about your pots, and you lay them out in these beautiful, intricate patterns, and you're the same way. Like there's very little quiet space, but it's always still there. But we're always drawn back to all those things around the quiet space. And I think too, like you're talking about Tom's pots, I think about my collection of pots, and I have so many beautiful, I call them my brown wood-fired pots, and they're these beautiful quiet pots, and those are the ones I want to buy. And I have shelves of them because I think we appreciate that very, very quiet surface in a way that we just can't. We just can't do it. Yeah.
Exactly the same way. So much so that Melissa, my wife, has said no more brown pots. Like you can't be bringing brown pots
Oh
up.
my God. I tell her that I understand that completely. I don't know if it will ever happen, but who knows?
Well, a part of the cycle of farming that you grew up with and that you're a part of now is so similar to making pots, especially I'm sure on the dairy farm, because when you're in spring, you're thinking about fall. And when you're in fall, you're thinking about spring. Like there's this constant cycle. And I think in the studio, when you're making slipware, I mean, you're making, we should say this for the listener, red clay, colored slips or white slips, and then decoration on top of that. like you got to plan this out. It's not a willy-nilly, let's be spontaneous type thing because stuff dries. So can you talk about sort of that nature, both with the farming or maybe just in the studio, how you learned that sort of cyclical nature of this?
I'm trying to think if there was ever a time where I wasn't planning it out and something dried, which of course that always happens. I think it comes with waiting on the slip to be perfect. So you really learn quickly it's almost like whiplash. You slam on the brakes immediately. The world has to stop if the pots are ready. Like the world accommodates. And I have a damp box. I don't like to use it. I just have not figured that out quite yet. I guess because the pots are never where I want them in the damp box. So it's easier for me to just go throughout my day and find the pots where they are at that time and then decorate them, or maybe it's just an hour kind of thing. But yeah, like I really enjoy knowing that like today I'm going to make 20 cups and tomorrow morning I'm going to trim them. Tomorrow afternoon I'm going to slip them. And depending on how my body feels, I may start decorating them, or I may probably, if I'm good to myself, wait until the next day to start decorating. Because I find I'm 55 and I can't push myself as much as I used to because all of a sudden my shoulders are up in my ears and why does my neck hurt? Because you've pushed it too much. But growing up on a farm, we couldn't pause anything. And I wasn't part of the farming because it was a dairy farm and that was men's work kind of thing. But I grew up with a work ethic. Like no one on that farm stopped working. It was, you worked from the time you got up until the time you took your shower and went to bed. And that was a good life. So it is ingrained in me to very rarely stop and rest because work brings something good. Work equals success. And it is how I see, it's how I see success. I'm working towards something and that's going to equal good for me, because in the end, I've got a kiln load of pots that I'm unloading and I'm so happy to unload that kiln.
And it's kind of the emotional payoff when you get to unload the kiln, because making pots can be a struggle. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, it can be a struggle. And I think at times when I unload the kiln, I'm like, oh, okay, yes, this was worth that annoying whatever a couple weeks ago.
I agree. And I say this over and over again to my kids. It's Christmas morning and we all say it. But when I unload the kiln, all it does is make me want to go right back in there and start working again. I give myself one day off and that's the day that the kiln is firing. And I'm usually cleaning everything that didn't get cleaned for 3 weeks. I'm still working, but I'm not working, kind of thing.
How do you think about progression? Like as in, when you're at school teaching, you're looking at students progress. Like from the beginning of the semester to the end, they get better. How do you judge progression with yourself?
Progression, and to me, is not staying stagnant and changing something at some point in a pattern to where it's a little bit maybe tighter or actually a little bit looser. If I am not changing my designs, I don't feel that's progression. And if I'm not trying a new form, that's not progression either. So I'm always trying to sneak in like one idea. So today when I go throw 20 cups, I'm actually throwing forms that I threw 5 years ago because I came across a video that I did for my students. And I thought, oh, why did I stop doing those? So I will try to make that same form with all the knowledge that I have from the last 5 years of throwing so that it becomes something new. And I expect it to be wonky. And I will expect to, the next time I go through, take that one cup or maybe the two and set it in front of me and say, okay, you need to figure out what you need to change about this. I was trying to make coffee mugs that were just a little bit taller and squatter, like just rounder and fuller. And I was trying and trying and trying. And I had some friends over, Potter friends, and we were talking about it. And I was showing her the two different ones. And she said, oh, it just needs to be more round in the round. And as soon as she said it, yes, it does need to be more round in the round. because it was this thing that I didn't have visually in front of me. There was no sketch, but there were these two pots and we were like, there's something in the middle. There's something in the middle. We're going to get it.
A couple years ago, I can't remember when, but I noticed you would you would throw and pinch things.
Yes.
And I've been doing that. And I think I got that from you.
Ooh, really? That's exciting.
When you submitted images for the book, and we should say you're in the upcoming book that's about Low-Fire. Yeah. And there's this it's a carrot vase that's in the book. In fact, it's for chrome and copper. So your image is like showing chrome and copper because it has this beautiful leaves that have both a chrome green and a copper green. So you can kind of see the difference in color in the slip or underglaze. But it's like, it's a very solid form, but there's parts that are pinched and softens that. And I think for people that are doing repetitious pattern, once whatever you're painting on changes, you have to change. And I think that's like a really nice way to do that. And I've seen like Martina Lanton, I got to watch her work. She was doing a similar thing. Like I've noticed Allegheny Meadows, like people, it's almost like as soon as you can make it perfectly round, then you're like, okay, let's pinch it and try to make it not round.
Yeah, this is boring.
Yeah. But then you're saying maybe going back a little more to round. So can you talk about that kind of push-pull between the pinched surface and the ribbed surface or like the straight surface?
Yeah. So the pinch surface is actually when the carrots came in, because I didn't want to put those beautiful, pristine lemons and blackberries on that surface because I felt like the blackberries were so busy that they couldn't go on that surface. But the carrots, because they were still new in my mind, they seemed to be like a perfect fit to go onto that kind of surface. And I really enjoy what that looks like, especially when the slip breaks a little bit, that it's kind of ghostly, so you get to see more of the material than you do on the berries and the lemon pieces. But as far as like that vase itself, that form, yeah, I love how at the top when you come up, like you probably can't see it in that image, but the top is so thin compared to the bottom. Like the bottom is very sturdy and the top is very thin. And I enjoy that about it because you can't control it. And I actually will go around and look at them. And if it's too level, I will knock an area down or I will pull an area up. Just because like you said, I don't want it to be perfect anymore because it does seem to be a lot more interesting. And then the cups that I made into the clover ones, I actually wanted to have sections, and they reminded me also of the pieces you did way, 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 way back, the quilt pieces that you were breaking into 4 sections, and I wanted to have a little edge, and I wanted to have these rough edges because I take the wooden rib and I knock it in there, and it, when you push that wet, sloppy clay, it makes that beautiful little edge that could be a little sharp, but that's okay. But it's going away from this idea of a perfect, pristine pot to something that really is loose. And I like that balance of having that tight kind of berry image drawn right over top of it, with those little rough edges. And it's just a dance that I did enjoy for a while. And I will go back to that. I do like taking a little walk with the finger pinched pots, and then I think, oh, but I love that form. What else can I do with it, kind of thing. And that's the nice thing about what we do. We can do whatever we want. You can't tell me what to do. This is what I'm doing.
Well, one of the other sections of the book that you're in is talking about using commercial glazes and the freedom that that's allowed you to have, mainly because in the school year, you're teaching full time. So you're putting tons of hours in at school and energy, like I'm sure when you've been teaching for 8 hours, you're tired. So when you come home and get in the studio, the commercial glaze and slip and underglaze allows you to have some dependability. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like which parts of your process do you want to be dependable and which parts do you want to be a little more energetic or maybe, not undependable, but just more spontaneous?
I really want the glazes to be dependable because that really can ruin everything. So I really like the fact that Amico's clear glaze can can play well with a lot of other glazes. So I really need those to be dependable. And when I started teaching, there wasn't a ceramics program. And the ceramics program I came from didn't teach glaze mixing. There were just glazes that were always mixed and that were there. And wasn't going to have that capability either. So I was working with standard ceramics glazes. And just because I have that catalog of all the glazes that I have to order my supplies from, that whether it be Blick supplies or Saks Arts or all of those, it just made sense for me to try these colors out because I didn't have to buy 25 pounds of dry glaze. I could just have these containers and the students could test them. I could test them. And it really opened up a world of opportunity that I didn't have in my college ceramic classes. And it was wonderful. Like I got to try the Maiolica glazes that Amico used to have. We are still lamenting the discontinuation of that line. And I still have jars of them. They're all dried out, but I have them. But it really did. So it allowed me to play that way in a dependable way. So I could layer glazes and understand, two layers versus 3 layers. And I could, like in a college setting, assign my students to test things. Like you test this, and we were all learning. And I think that my students were just as excited as I was when I would say to them, we've never done this one before. So of course they are invested and they want to know, like, oh, what's this one going to look like? And then we call it the, we're going to make this a highly recommended glaze combination versus a not so recommended glaze combination. Do not do this kind of thing. So I like the dependability of that. I would say that my clay body, it's standard 103. It is dependable, but because of needing it to be really, really soft, like I need it to be really soft to throw, like my joints are not cooperating in ways that I want them to. So that has caused me to reconsider how I throw forms, which forms I throw when, because sometimes it just doesn't want to cooperate, but it's still dependable. So I don't play wildly. I just play a little bit, but I do. I mean, I love throwing with Reclaim, and I know some people don't, but I love throwing with it because it is so soft and I can make things big, wide and big, but never tall and big. But it does force me to do things differently. Like if I want to go tall, I'm playing with sections, and I love playing with sections like that because all of a sudden something's in front of me, whereas before I was looking down on it. So it's another perspective.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com.
Hey folks, Sunshine Cobb here, ceramic artist and current resident coordinator at the Bray. I'm excited to announce that our application portal is now open for our 2025 residency cohort. Applications are due by December 19th, 2024. For details on all our residencies available, head to archibray.org/residencies. Please help us spread the word about this amazing new opportunity at the Bray. Thanks so much.
You mentioned that when you started, you essentially almost started a ceramics program at a public school in Western Pennsylvania. How did that work out funding-wise? It feels like school administrators across the country are tightening down on art programs. So can you talk about like what it was like in the beginning and how you've seen school funding change through your decades-long career in the public schools?
It has changed. When I was hired, I was actually hired part-time as a junior high art teacher, so 7th and 8th graders. Whew. Yeah, they're crazy. So I was hired for them, but the school that I was in, it's a small school. We go back and forth between AA, AAA. Our population is around 500, 600, just grades 9 through 12. But at the time, our 7th grade and 8th grade were there. So I was teaching them half the time. And probably 10 years before I was hired, they originally had 2 art teachers. So there were 2 classrooms. And it was called the crafts program. So it was the 80s. And then the fine arts program with the drawing and painting. And my colleague at the time, when I came in, he said, I'd really like to get this program back. Would you consider teaching half day and we'll reintroduce the clay programs? Which like, yes, please, let's do this. So our administration at the time was very arts supportive. So our superintendent, his daughters played strings. So he was very interested in the arts program. So he was very supportive of building that program. So they expanded my position to the full day. And over the next few years, we had a housing expansion. So we were getting more students. So we had to expand the district. So we built a middle school, and the middle school kids left. And I was given the opportunity to either teach full-time at the middle school, or they would expand my program at the high school to a full day, which of course I took that without hesitating. I wanted to be at the high school, and they funded me really well. So, and that was late 90s, early 2000s, where they were still very, very happy to be promoting and supporting 2 art teachers, 2 full-time programs. It was wonderful. My colleague was wonderful. And they remodeled the entire building and expanded our classrooms to where not only did I have a classroom that was considered like a sculpture classroom with all the drop downs and the stuff to build with, but I have a room that's just for the wheels, which I'd never had before. So I could have 12 wheels going at the same time. And then they expanded my kiln room, and my colleague had his own 2-dimensional classroom. So it was lovely and wonderful. And the year after we opened the building back up with that program, he retired, and they said, we're not going to rehire him.
Oh, wow.
And the program collapsed. And that was in 2012, 11 or 12. When that happened. So like I rode this very, very high, like, oh, this is wonderful. We're building the program. Like my kids were winning awards. It was great. We were doing so well. And then it crashed, and the students were heartbroken, and I was heartbroken. So I've seen that happen. Just like how we got through it, I don't know, but it was a really hard few years adjusting to not having another artist to work with, and also watching the amount of students who were no longer having access to art classes, which is really, really difficult because we had these 3 classrooms and only one of them was being utilized at a time. And it's still like that. And we are still trying to build it back up. But at this point, it's a financial burden. Every year when my principal says, what would you like to see happen next year? He now answers for me and says, I know you want another teacher. I said, I would take a half-time teacher at this point. So yeah, I mean, my budget is still reasonable. Actually, my budget is still good for the amount of students that I teach. Like I'm not wanting. What I want is another faculty member so that more kids can get art. Like I feel for them.
In the school, is it mostly 3-dimensional now, or is there another 2D program?
We have 2 programs. We have the 2D program and we have the 3D program, and I am doing all of those. But most of my students are signing up for the 3D classes.
Oh, right, because it's based on student demand.
Right. Yeah, that's what will happen. Like I looked at my schedule for the upcoming school year, and I believe I have 1 or 2 2D classes, and the rest are all 3D. And I do have a senior class where we do everything. Like whatever they want to do, we're doing it. Just bring it to me. I'll figure out a way.
Because that up and down cycle that you've talked about with funding and just in general teaching, I mean, teaching is one of the most scrutinized professions. Like, where else do politicians actively talk about your profession and make changes every 4 to 8 years? Like, people aren't doing that with lawyers and with doctors. You know what I mean? Like, it's ironic that so much pressure is put on teachers to solve both big social problems with your work, but also practical problems. Like, we're taking away half your funding, and now you have to make this work. So how do you think teachers that are starting now, like, how do you teach a teacher to be resilient? Because I think that's something that they need going forward.
They do need it. And I had the opportunity to work with a young teacher this year, just hired, and we were constantly giving her advice about how to interact even with administration, how to interact with coworkers, just as a matter of how do you stand up straight and hold your ground kind of thing, because they've never had to do that before, and they've never hit adversity, because usually when you're student teaching, your cooperating teacher is making it as easy as possible for you because they want you to have success and they just want you to teach, and there isn't even the time to teach new teachers how to interact with administration, how to respectfully bring an argument to your administration. Those things aren't in the programs anymore. So we really have to count on those older teachers around us to do that, and it's just a lot of conversations over lunch, to help them. And it is hard, but if they don't come and ask for help, or if we don't see them kind of struggling and pull them aside and say, I think you're struggling with something here. How can I help you? Because they're not really taught to reach out either.
One other thing about teaching before we move on to a different topic. Before we started recording, we were talking about COVID, like teaching art online through the COVID experience, and really how students have changed post-COVID. So you had mentioned that we just finished the 2024 school year, and I guess COVID is 2020, but you mentioned that, or the start of it was 2020. You mentioned that you're finally feeling like the students are back to normal, quote unquote, now.
Yeah.
So can you talk about how you've seen those students change in their attention span, their outgoingness, things like that?
This past year, my students were more interested in talking to me, interacting and participating in the class and with their classmates. Online teaching caught them, at least this past year, the seniors, caught them when they were 14 years old. And no one smiles and says that was the best time of their life. We were all trying to figure things out at 14. So being isolated and not having any ground rules about how to do anything, really, it did affect them. But it was nice to see them every year getting a little more interested, invested, and understanding how a classroom works, because they really lost that whole concept of what a classroom is. Like, you come in, you sit down, you assess the room for what's going on, what should I be doing, and then you start doing it, or the teacher tells you what you should be doing. Like, they just didn't understand how to do that. And it took 3 years to get those kids to understand that. So now the younger kids that are coming in, the 9th and 10th graders, they have a better concept of that, and they have expectations. Like, they're ready. They're like, what are we going to do today? So that has happened. But like 2021, 2022, when we were going back and forth, it was hard because I didn't see students on a daily basis. They weren't showing up for video classes when we were doing that. So there were very few students that I had a relationship with. And in the arts classes, we build relationships with students, and they learn to trust us. They have expectations about what they can and can't do in the classroom. So not having that for a couple years, I don't think that kids felt safe, like not in a terrible, terrible way, but they just didn't understand what it was that they were doing in there, other than they knew they wanted to make art. But over the years, they're making art differently now. Like, they're very invested in what they're doing, and they want to be there. They want to be there all day. And some of them I will take.
I was fortunate to go to a really strong public high school in Virginia that had arts. So my whole life was set on its path when I was 15. So I really think like what you're doing is like a service. I think of high school teaching as like, you're giving a service to America. It sounds so dramatic, but I really do, because you're helping students to realize that creativity is as important as practical skills that will take them into STEM classes or, whatever the rest of what they're studying is. How do you think the arts prepare students to be good citizens?
Oh, the group of seniors that I had this year, we talked about interactions with other people. They were very interested in interacting with adults and what was acceptable and what was not acceptable. And they were very interested in, how do I take this out into the world? Where are the art careers? And, sometimes I would say to them, I just don't know, because it has changed so much, but they were willing to look and ask questions. And so many times they would be doing something and I would say, well, this, even though this is an art thing, look how you could apply that to this field of work or this field of work. So they were open to those conversations and they were asking about that, because, the kids that are just going out into the world now and last year as well, they're so worried that they're going to make the wrong decision because of the way they were raised. They were raised in this very Pinterest scrapbook. Everything has to look pretty. So I spent a lot of time focusing on their failures, because they all failed in some way, whether it was little or small or large. And I would say, okay, how are you going to get through this? And do you see that this is not going to affect your life in a major way? Like, you just have to problem solve and you just have to figure out how to get through it. And that helped them understand that as they go out into the world, there isn't a perfect answer, that they can try a whole bunch of things. Said the first thing you choose is not going to be the thing, or the first thing you choose is going to be the thing for you. But just like when we were doing watercolor, and remember when that completely failed and you were devastated? Oh yeah, I remember. And I said, and what did we do to like move on from that? It's like, I feel like that's the best thing that they can learn, is to have that failure and pick themselves up and move on. I'm sure you've seen this in clay classes. Sometimes I'll say to a kid, do you just want to smash it? And they say yes. And I'm like, just do it. Just do it. Because sometimes there's just no fixing it. And your life doesn't end because you smashed the thing that they were making. And they feel so much better because they were so caught up in succeeding at whatever the project was. And I could see, like, they were just getting smaller and smaller and smaller in their seat. And I'm like, this is not how I want this to end. I want them to come out feeling like they learned something. So allowing them to give up and tell me what they would have done wrong and then move on from them. I mean, we all do that. Like, we all have to understand resilience, and we all have to understand that perfection is not the end game. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy?
Wise words.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think this also, I was just thinking about the age of these students. Like, they were in latter elementary school during the financial recession, or I guess early elementary school. They get older and then they're in high school and they have the pandemic. Like, there was a generation in American students that really got hit by their parents being very stressed about money and
yes,
everyone being stressed about health within an 18-year span. So in a lot of ways, art is a good way to let them relax into authentic life, which is failure, what you're just saying. Like,
yes,
that's life. That's what we do. We fail and we learn.
Yeah. So many of my students this year thanked me for just letting them have that space, that they wouldn't have survived their high school if they hadn't had that. We had a lot of kids that were it was really difficult for them to get through. And I just think if there's anything I did right, it was with this group, was just give them space. I tried to just, what the assignment is, I will be over here kind of thing, because we all need to learn how to be responsible for our own learning. And the last thing I want is everybody's project to look the same, or everybody's project to look like it came from my classroom. They want it to look like that's from that kid.
Well, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about building a studio, and also just kind of setting up the rest of your life, because you have been a teacher for 25? How long?
Oh, 29 years.
Okay, 29
at
years.
least.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so close. I'm so close.
Exactly. So in retirement, I get the sense that you're going to be in the studio a ton, and you've built a studio that really fits your needs now. So can you talk about kind of looking forward and wanting to build a studio that was your dream studio and how you did it? Like, what does it actually look like?
Oh, we had a little barn we weren't using it, but it was falling over. And of course, I don't want anything to be taken down. So I made the suggestion that we make that become my studio. So we took it down and we put it back up and added to the footprint of it. And I wanted something that felt light and beautiful and still reflected the history of the farm. So we left the original beams on the interior of it. So we have there are these beautiful, what are they, 170 years old, because the barn was built in the 1800s. So it's just this beautiful building. And it has a very high ceiling, and it has a cupola in it. So I just wanted light, because we all know we've all worked in basements forever and ever and ever. And I had the opportunity to work in studios where I did have windows. So I understood how important they were. So I wanted windows. I wanted to reflect the farm and the history of this little farm that we're on. And, my husband did most of the designing on it, but I also wanted it to have a showroom aspect to it, because the studio that I had before was in my walkout basement. And it was amazing the amount of work that I could make in this tiny space. I think we all are like that. It's incredible what we can do. We just don't realize it because we're on top of ourselves in a little space. People wanted to come shop, and we have a winery just like less than a mile away, and they would want to come up, but everything was in boxes. So it was very frustrating because I did not have time to clean my studio and unload things to have people come up and look. So that was really important to have the gallery aspect of it, as well as having a larger work area and a kiln area that was a little more closed off, and having flexibility. So the space it's flexible enough that I can move tables around and add tables, so that if I want to have people come in and do a workshop, we can. It is the bottom of my list to have people in my studio. It is, I just want it for myself right now. And at some point that will change, but my friends will attest to this, that I love my solitude so much, because I give so much of myself away during the day, to all of my students, that I come home, and when I walk into my studio, it just envelops me in this big sigh of relief, like, okay, it's quiet in here and no one's going to interrupt me. So yeah, that crossover between how do you transfer yourself from the busyness of a teaching day into a studio. For me, it's as simple as getting out of my car and not even walking into my house. I get out of my car and I walk right into the studio, and I just assess what's going on, what do I need to do, and then decide, do I need to go into the house, or can I stay out here for another hour kind of thing, because that's just where I want to be.
Yeah, and having the cupola and the light, I mean, all the pictures you take in the studio are amazing because there's so much light.
There is.
So can you talk about like kind of the practical design? Because I noticed you have built-ins, you have like built-in counter, like a workstation situation that I think is interesting. Can you talk about that?
I took Deb Schwarzkopf's studio, what was it? It was like 4 or 5 years ago, studio building online workshop. And the one thing she talked about was this material MDO for countertops. So that was like the only thing that I knew that I wanted. It was like, I want these countertops. I want them permanently built in. And I had been in a studio back in the early 2000s that had those built-in countertops right at the window. So I already knew, like, this is what I want. I want to be able to look out the window while I'm working. So we built those with the underneath was open, so I can just slide tubs and things out. In the front of the studio, we built a cabinet, a beautiful wormy chestnut cabinet space with that same workspace or work material on the top of it, so that could still be a work area, as well as more front of the studio is that gallery space. So it still looked like it was more gallery than it was work. So I have that. I have a table. It's a plywood table that I can move wherever I want. But what I've done is divided the area. So there's the work area that is separate from the front. And so it's just kind of like where most of the mess is made. And it holds all of my clay, and then my wheel is there. But the one thing that I did that I absolutely love, and Mitchell Spain?
Yeah.
Ceramics. He was like a year and a half, 2 years ago. He just very quickly had this video on his Instagram feed of this little piece of sheet metal that went around his countertop that was a tray that would catch all of his cutoffs. And I put that in my brain, like someday I want to put that on there. And all it is it's the stud. It goes in the wall, and I think the wires run up in it, and it's like $10.
Yeah, metal
at
stud.
Lowe's. Yeah, and it's oh my God, it's almost life-changing because everything catches in there, and it keeps so much clay off of the floor. So it makes me so happy to be able to incorporate these things that I see other artists have figured out that really will make your studio life so much better. Because I'm a slob. I understand this about myself. I'm not neat, and I will spread out as far as you will let me. Like my workspace will just continue to grow, which is why I think I drew lines on the table at Aeromont to keep myself within them. But yeah, just that was the latest thing that we did that I was so happy about, because it makes cleanup easy, and it keeps the studio while I'm working clean, which is the most important thing is to not have that constant dust coming around, because I make enough dust on top as it is.
And I noticed you have radiant floor heating, which is such a great idea for potters, because it's awesome and it's great heat. But also, if you put water on it, it can create humidity in the winter, which is helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful. The only drawback is the winters have been so mild that it shuts off.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, I invested all this money into this heating system. It needs to be cold. So yeah, it does allow that kind of humidity. It's mostly just so nice that I don't have so much air blowing around. And it feels so much different when that heat is on. And I had come from another studio that had that. So of course, I was like, oh, can we put in radiant heat? And when there's no floor to begin with, of course you can.
How much did that floor cost? Because I want to build a studio. And is it crazy expensive, or is it, approachable relative to also just building a concrete floor?
It's a reach. Offhand, I honestly don't remember. And because my husband grew up in the construction trade, we had a lot of friend deals that really helped us. And we had a lot of friends who helped us with it. I don't think it's ridiculous, but it is something that you would just have to look at and say, okay, this is something that I may not need. Because if you already have heat coming in, it's already there. But if you can do it, you'll never regret it. Just like we talk about, you'll never regret making your studio 2 feet bigger.
Or 10.
Or 10. Or 20.
Yeah.
We moved the kiln into the kiln room, and I was like, it's too small. It's already too small. And my husband was just like, no, it's fine.
Well, you mentioned that he grew up in the trades, and he's a mason, right? That's
Yes.
his thing. And I saw this video that you posted of him breaking a rock, and it's like magic. Like, how I don't quite understand how it even works. He's kind of like putting wedges in at specific spots to split it. Do you just walk around kind of watching him to see what he's doing?
Well, I listen, like, okay, I hear him tapping. He's been tapping a while. I bet he's going to split that rock. So those are old barnstone foundations, and he can assess each stone and understand where might be a good place to cut or not, whether it's a good stone, if it has a crack or some kind of a seam. And he'll drill horizontally, and then he'll put those wedges in, and then he is out there just smacking and pounding until it pops apart. And it's incredible. Not many people do that. He learned it when he was really young. But yeah, if you need some barnstone, I have a field of it in the back.
Wow. I love that you guys are reusing everything from the original homestead, because you said 1870s. Is that the
Yeah.
original?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it just, I think at this point in everybody's life, if you have the opportunity to reuse something, it just makes sense. And there were more things that I really wanted to use, but just were more work than they were worth. Like I wanted to reuse the um, corrugated tin roof. I originally wanted that to be the siding, and it was explained to me that it would be very difficult to insulate it and keep critters and varmints out of it. So those didn't go into the studio. We still have it. It will be used for another outbuilding that Pete wants to build for, his project. Now that the studio's done, he can focus on the things that he wants to do.
Well, in the studio, you've had at least one workshop, and it was a yoga workshop. So it was a creativity and yoga practice workshop. So can you talk about your own yoga practice and also that workshop, like how y'all structured that?
Oh yeah. Yoga keeps me sane. Not only it's that place to quiet my mind, which I appreciate it. I don't do well quieting it, but I think what most people forget is that yoga is about a practice, just like meditation. You'll never do it perfectly. You just have to do it where you are that day, kind of thing. So it's like, bring your mind back, stop thinking about this. So I try to do yoga 4 to 5 days a week. And each day it's a different practice, focusing on whatever I feel like I need to do. But I find that I carry my tension and stress in places in my body that affects how I can make pots. So it's a battle to constantly put my shoulders back down, stretch out my hips, kind of thing. And the yoga, it helps tremendously with that, because it's constantly put your shoulders down your back, kind of thing. And I find myself doing it now. Yeah, it helps because I can quiet myself and then go out and work. Because sometimes I come home from work and I just think, oh, I can't even set foot in that studio yet because it's just been a day and I need the quiet. And mostly I just need to stretch and I need to move, and things that I haven't moved all day, they need addressed. So that's really helpful for me. What's also helpful too is that my teacher, I've been with her for 6 years now, and it's so nice to grow together, to see how she's dealt with things in her life that are challenging, and in our studio, we're very open about how our practice helps us just get through whatever it is that we're getting through, because everything that's in yoga is life reflected, because every pose is a challenge. Every pose that you hold means you have to sit through that challenge. Just like whatever challenge you have in life, you do have to learn how to sit through it, regardless of whether you like it or not. You still are going to sit through it. So how can you get through it, whether it's through breathing or just focusing on whatever, stand on one leg? Okay, I'm going to stand on one leg, kind of thing. So it helps me so much. And I know if I have to miss a couple days, it's rough. We just got back from vacation. I did yoga every other day, and I was on vacation doing nothing. But I knew that I needed to keep that. I just needed to keep my headspace really good, because I didn't want to come back and say, "Oh, I've got to do yoga again." It's like, no, this is what I do. This is how I live my life, and it really does translate to everything.
Do you have any tips for beginners? Because I think some people might be listening to this and any type of exercise. And I mean, yoga has the advantage of that there's mental and physical benefits. But I think the hardest part of exercise is starting. Once you start, the process pulls you along. So for people that might be just starting, do you have any thoughts or ways to keep it consistent?
I know that I need to do something whether I think I need to do it or not, because I always feel better afterwards. I may just decide to do an abbreviated 30 minutes instead of an hour, and I'm still happy that I did it. I find that when I go to the yoga studio, I've commented to my teacher, I didn't know I needed that. And she's always thankful that I voiced that to the whole class. I just didn't know that I needed that. But I think that setting up small goals, like as a teacher, I know that when I get home from work, there's only a certain amount of time that I have. So I can do it, maybe at 5:00, that's the time I'm going to do it. So I set up that time in my mind, and that's when I'm going to do it. And then I do it. And then I move on to do the next thing. Incorporating that into your life, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can become a big thing. It may be great if it was a big thing. I know that your health and your workouts are just as important to you, that you really need to do them regularly, because if you don't get the results that you want. And the results aren't necessarily that things are perfect. It's just that you feel better. And as we age, we don't stay strong. We just have to work harder at it. And at this point in my life, I'm looking at what can I do differently, because my body does things differently now. So I'm looking at different things and how to do that. And that's going to cause me to say, okay, I need to do something in a different way. How am I going to do this? And it's growth, just like with everything. Like, you just got to figure out how to do it better, differently, and not get bored.
Mm-hmm. To wrap up, can you plug the upcoming shows you have? I think you have one with Charlie Cummings coming up here soon. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Charlie Cummings, one of my favorite galleries. They're great people. I'm in the Cup, the Intimate Object show, and the new goat series that I'm working on. Heads up, they're coming. They will be there. And I know after this will be released afterwards, but there may be some pieces left there's a garden show as well. So those are places where you can find me online.
And can you plug your Instagram also, just in case people want to get in touch?
Oh yeah, it's Christy L. Culp, all one word. And I'm also on Facebook at Christy Culp Ceramics. And I love it when people reach out. I'm always happy to answer questions and give whatever I've got.
Well, thanks so much, Christy. It was good to see you.
Yeah, it was great to see you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all you do.
Oh, thanks. I'd like to thank Christy for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to chat with her, and I love following her work. I've been a fan of hers for a long time. We did a workshop years ago, and we got to collaborate on some pots, and it was really fun to work then, and it's also nice to see how the work is changing and developing over the years. I've learned a ton from looking at her work, so I hope you guys will check her out. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's the Michiana Pottery Tour, the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, and Cornell Studio Supply. I'd also like to thank the Archie Bray Foundation, which is the major supporter for the Brickyard Network. We're an extension of the Bray, and they support all of our podcasts, so I appreciate that. Also wanted to mention, as you heard Sunshine Cobb talking about in the ad earlier, that the residency portal is now open for this year's residence. You can apply at archiebray.org up until December the 19th. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.